welcome back to another episode of Sports Speak. I'm your host, Tanyon Loose.
I'm your co-host, Spencer Ripchik.
So we're coming back to you guys after a little bit of a break here since we all had off from school. So Spencer, how was your break?
It was pretty solid. A lot of traveling back and forth to Florida and back and forth to State College. A lot of hours spent in the car. How about you?
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I had to drive down to Florida, soak up some of that sunlight and warm weather before we're back here in a day where there's a wind chill in the teens and temperatures below freezing. So I'm not at all glad to be back, but here we are, back in the cold again. So as we start all these off, we're going to go with our favorite news of the week. So Spencer, why don't you just get us started this time?
So it's not really my favorite news of the week or like any good news for Penn State, but I mean, they lost back-to-back games against Notre Dame. Penn State men's hockey did. I know the pairing was not what they hoped for, but I mean, Penn State was hoping to beat them as it would be a big boost for their season. The first game was pretty close until the third period where the Irish scored 2 goals to put it away. The second game was a bit closer as it was an overtime game, as Guy Gadowski looked like he showed some adjustments in the 2 days. But after the 2 losses, Penn State sits at 12-10 on the season, and it sits dead last in Big Ten with the conference record, which is not where Guy Gadowski wants his squad, definitely. Penn State, it can't mope around because they have Michigan, and I can only see this being a pounding, or it could be a potential back-to-back losses, as like they could lose both the pairings, which wouldn't be good since Michigan's one of the best teams in the Big Ten this season. But on the bright side, Connor McEachern is third in the Big Ten in goals, so maybe a postseason award for him. But I don't know. It's not looking good for Penn State so far.
Yeah, it's not been the greatest season for them, and I don't think things are going to get better taking on Michigan. I remember when we did an earlier episode, just looking at all the talent on that Michigan roster, it's a little scary to look at. But as far as my favorite news of the week, I have a little bit of a kind of a heartfelt thing here. We have Brady Berge is returning to Penn State wrestling again after he kind of medically retired from the sport. It's kind of a little bit of a sad story. He was a very successful wrestler and just kept getting injured over and over again. Just kind of thought it was best to step away from the sport. And now he's back. He has eligibility, and after he kind of coached at South Dakota State for a little bit. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on his transfer in the next segment because we're actually going to talk wrestling for a little bit in the near future.
Yeah, but I just want to bring up that as of today, Penn State just hired Katie Schumacher-Colley as the successor to Coach Rush Rose after he announced his retirement. She has 9 years experience coaching under her belt, including 8 years at the University of Illinois Chicago, where she won 125 matches, and she becomes the third coach in Penn State women's volleyball history to coach the team.
Yeah, I think that's a good step for this team, and they can get back on the winning track again for sure.
As Tanyon talked about earlier, there's been a lot of noise around the college wrestling community, so I have some questions prepared for the expert, Tanyon Loose, to see what his takes on all the transfers and how it affects Penn State. So my first question is, Penn State has added 2 big transfers of its own recently. Does that make them the national title favorite this year?
I'd say that's kind of the consensus around the wrestling world, I think, at this point. Obviously, Drew Hildebrandt joining the team is huge. I mean, he's a returning All-American. Penn State hasn't had success with the 125-pound weight class in several years. I mean, they had Robbie Howard, but he's injured for this season. So I think that's really just a massive get there. It really increases their kind of point-scoring potential at NCAAs a considerable amount. And he's kind of a proven guy who's really experienced, and you know what he brings you kind of day in and day out. So that's a big add. And then, as I said earlier, the Brady Berge coming back to the team, I mean, it's a little bit of a question mark. There's really no way for anyone outside of kind of himself and obviously probably Penn State's coaching staff to know like what his training has looked like while he was coaching at South Dakota State. I mean, obviously it's probably not the same as your athletes kind of would be doing. So you just don't know what kind of shape he's in, what kind of fitness level he's in, what kind of mentality he has right now. But I'm imagining that he wouldn't have come back if he didn't think that he was ready to take on this challenge. So I think those are obviously 2 big additions there for the team.
So do you think that Brady Berge could, like, as an older guy, could be a mentor to some of the younger guys on the team?
Well, I think, he's proven already with his coaching ability there that he knows how to coach athletes and bring people up and kind of raise their ability level. And Penn State has a number of experienced guys in the roster that can help out with that. I think it's more so, can he help out Penn State at 157 pounds? It's been a big struggle all season, so I think if he can come in and get them some points at NCAAs, I mean, he's an All-American, so I think if he can do that again, that would just be massive and probably cement title hopes for Penn State, barring any disastrous scenarios. And I think they've kind of risen to this point due to some of the other issues that a contender like Iowa has had. I mean, obviously, the big news earlier in the season was Spencer Lee is going to be out for the season, and I mean that's huge. I mean, he's the Hodge Trophy winner, so I mean, anytime you lose a guy like that, it's going to be a big problem. So I think it's going to end up not being as big a deal as maybe people originally made. Now that they have a guy in Drake Ayala who really is kind of, I mean, he didn't come out of nowhere, but he's had some big wins in recent weeks. And I think that he could really score some points at NCAAs and be a difference for this Iowa team. And they're also getting a guy in Michael Kemmerer back. He's going to be healthy again. So I think that Iowa, although they've kind of taken a little bit of a hit, is going to be a serious contender still.
All right, so I mean, 10-0 start, blew the doors off Maryland. Everything seems to be going right for Penn State right now. But is there anything still to be worried about?
I think you kind of just got to go back to like that Iowa team that we just talked about. You've seen what can happen with their health problems, and if anything like that happens to Penn State, I mean, that could spell disaster for a team that is going to rely somewhat heavily on its national champion to bring in points at NCAAs. So, I mean, that's always a concern. And you just had against Indiana, both Nick Lee and Roman Bravo Young were out with illnesses. So you just never know in today's landscape, like when people can get out. You never know if a COVID case here or there could just strike at the wrong time and just could really just cause major problems. And I think that with the way things are now and like the landscape of college wrestling, there's just really a good amount of good teams between Oklahoma State, Iowa, and even Michigan, who's kind of been almost in like an arms race recently with Penn State. I mean, Penn State brought in 2 transfers. Michigan brought in Nick Suriano, who's probably the favorite, 125 pounds now for the title. And they brought in a guy, Patrick Brookie from Princeton, who's done really well so far this season. But I think they've kind of may have an issue, and they have a guy in Stevan Micic, who is the number 3 ranked wrestler at 141 pounds, but he hasn't wrestled folk style in 2 years, and I think we saw that just the other day when they wrestled Pitt, and he lost handily to an unranked opponent. So you just don't want to see that from your top 5 ranked wrestler. So if he can't get things going again, that's really a guy that they were counting on scoring points. So I think Michigan can find themselves a little bit farther out of the title race when they're trying to chase down Iowa and Penn State, both in the Big Ten and outside of the Big Ten.
Yeah, it seems like now in college sports, it just takes like one player, and especially in wrestling, to get like the coronavirus or sick or something, and then that could be a loss that was not expecting to lose. But coming up in the next couple of weeks, what do you think Penn State fans should look forward to? I know Michigan's just on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big one I was going to highlight there. They're taking on Michigan next Friday at the time we're recording this. So, I mean, they've just been similar to PSU. They've been in a similar situation where they're just trying to catch up to Iowa. And I think both of them have really kind of almost gotten to that level where they're equal. It's really, I mean, it's probably Penn State is the favorites, but it's just about as close to anybody's title as you could have kind of in recent history. So I think that that's going to be just a huge matchup there. It's one that Penn State needs to win if they want to get the title, because they have to travel to both Michigan and Iowa this season, so they're not going to get that advantage of wrestling in Rec Hall with the home crowd there. So I think it's going to be a great match to watch. Both of them have legitimate NCAA title contenders on both sides. They both have several All-Americans returning. They both brought in new transfers, so I think it's going to be huge, and there's going to be a number of great matchups at 141 pounds, 125 pounds, 197. All guys are ranked in like the top 10 there, just facing off against each other. It's going to be a really great match that fans are going to be excited for.
Yeah, definitely will be some primetime TV in Ann Arbor in the wrestling world.
Absolutely. So kind of segueing to another rec hall sport here, like we just talked about, men's volleyball has gotten off to a great start this season. Coach Mark Pavlik has his guys currently sitting at 2-0, and they've had a number of ranked wins over BYU that really kick-started the season for them. But I'm kind of wondering who else is kind of a threat for an NCAA title run for the Penn State men's volleyball team now that they've maybe cemented themselves as a legitimate contender in the national landscape.
So I am going to go with UCLA. I mean, Penn State slotted in at number 5 in the preseason AVCA coaches poll, leaving 4 teams ahead of them. One of them is number 2, UCLA. Last season, UCLA was knocked out of the tournament in the second round, which is not what the Bruins hoped for. However, this season, a lot of players are returning that look to make a big impact. 2 of those players that stand out is outside hitter Cole Keterzinski and middle blocker Merrick McHenry, who were both named to the block season preseason All-American team. So big name, big accolades there for the preseason. As only a sophomore, McHenry currently is the 12th best, has the 12th best hitting percentage in all the NCAA. So as even the young guy is up there with all the big names. I think UCLA is the biggest threat to Penn State because the two teams, they actually play each other in the Big Ten Pac-12 Challenge, so that would be a big top 5 matchup, which should prove to see which team is the better team coming out of that. So if UCLA takes a game from them in that game, it could set the tone going into the tournament. So I think UCLA is one of those top dogs in the Pac-12, which is one of the better conferences in college volleyball. So yeah, I think that they could be a big threat. How about you?
I can't deny that UCLA is going to be a contender, but that loss also concerns me coming off that early round exit in the last NCAA tournament. And I mean, you might think that maybe like there's kind of like that revenge factor,
Yeah, that's
that
what I
underdog
think.
factor, but I feel like, and like you look back at stuff, like it's not always. It's sometimes a team that loses early like that kind of signals that maybe there's something wrong there, something like that. But I mean, they have a number of new guys in, so we'll just have to see. I, not being the premier men's volleyball expert out here, went with the number 1 overall team in the rankings, which is Hawaii. And I mean, but there's a reason why they're number 1 overall. I mean, they're the reigning national champions. They were runner-up in 2019. Obviously, the canceled tournament in 2020. But I mean, they were voted number 1 in preseason coaches poll, and they've only played twice this season, but they've beaten Loyola Chicago twice, who were ranked 7th in the preseason poll, and they only dropped 1 set to Loyola. So I mean, obviously they have the talent there. They've 3 first-team All-Americans and 1 second-team All-American that are all gone from last year's team. So I mean, that's a little bit of turnover that would kind of concern me there. But I mean, they're a proven team, and they kind of have proven that they're able to bring in talent year after year. So I think that they're going to be my favorites as someone who can challenge Penn State. But I mean, Penn State, on the other hand, is kind of a little bit more of an experienced roster. I mean, they have 2 returning All-Americans that were from the second team, and Cal Fisher and Brett Wildman. And I mean, they have considerable more experience compared to Hawaii, so I think that's a big thing there. Unfortunately, they don't play Hawaii this season like they do play UCLA, so you're not going to see them pitted against each other unless they find themselves in the NCAA tournament facing off. So we'll have to see down the line.
Yeah, I think those teams, I don't know why, but it seems like the Western teams are like the better volleyball teams. But, I mean, will Penn State break that with the East Coast team? I don't know. We'll have to see. Well, from floor to floor, Penn State men's basketball has had a 2-1 start to 2022. But they've had an up and down season the whole time. So what do you grade the Shrewsbury era so far?
I'm going to be a little bit ambitious out here and give Micah Shrewsbury an A. I mean, I think that he's done the most with what he has to work with. I mean, he has a solid roster, but compared to a lot of other teams in the Big Ten, he just doesn't really have the talent that teams like Purdue and Michigan or Ohio State or Iowa or Illinois, any of those other teams that are really kind of been atop the conference in recent years. And I think he's aware of that, and that's part of the reason why I'm giving an A is because he did some work in the offseason. He brought in some transfers who really obviously had a big impact this season. So I think that was a good step for me and shows that he's cognizant and knows what his team is missing and went out and addressed it. And I think that he's also done okay in the recruiting aspect so far. I mean, obviously a first-year head coach doesn't come right in and just instantly grab 5-star and high-level 4-star prospects, but he's brought in a number of guys who are really talented, and I think it's going in the right direction for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he actually grabbed the best recruiting class in Penn State basketball history. So I mean, that's pretty good for his first season. But I'm gonna go a little bit lower than you because I think there's some room for improvement. I'm gonna give him a B+. And the defense has really surprised me. He's looked very solid all season. Kept him in a couple of close games and held like team like powerhouses like Purdue under their average, LSU, just to name a few. Ohio State too. Their defense has looked really well. Seth Lundy looks like have a promising future at Penn State as a junior if he stays next year. He looks to be like he's the Penn State's leading scorer currently, and he's also a defensive powerhouse. He has a tough time. He does well guarding like guards like Jaden Ivey, some of the best players in the Big Ten. E.J. Liddell held both of them under their average, which is huge. They have some big wins as they came in the Big Ten over Northwestern and Indiana, who beat Ohio State. Not quite up there with the top dogs, which is why I'm going him down, which is not expected, obviously, this season because, I mean, he's a new coach, bunch of new names, don't know if the chemistry is going to work. So, I mean, they won't be up there with the Purdues, the Ohio States, the Michigan States, which which is as expected. Jalen Pickett also looks to seem like he's going to be the playmaker going forward for Penn State, which is not as a surprise since Sam Sessoms looked like to be the guy early, but now it looks like it's turning to Jalen Pickett, who plays a lot of minutes on the court. But yeah, I feel like it could have been higher if they didn't. The first part of their season wasn't great. They got blown out to UMass. They were close with Cornell, and then Michigan State was not a good loss either. So yeah, I feel like there's definitely room for improvement for him this season.
Yeah, I think I kind of expect that a little bit. I think they got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but I think it's kind of a matter of time for this team to kind of come together. And it's a little bit easier when you have guys like John Hare and other seniors in the locker room. They have experienced grad transfers and guys like that who, I mean, it makes it easier to transition, especially into a new coaching staff along with new players. So I think, especially as the years go along and he can really establish his kind of offensive and defensive schemes and systems in the team, he can bring in his own recruits. I really expect that this team's going to improve more so than it has in recent years, and they might be regarded maybe in the top half. I'm not saying that he's going to outcoach Tom Izzo out here. He's going to have Penn State on top of the conference every single year. But I think that for a school that hasn't really been known for its basketball team kind of throughout history, that Micah Shrewsbury has kind of taken the good first initial steps to getting this program upwards towards those upper echelon teams in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and I think to start off 2022, 2 good wins, Northwestern and Indiana. Both games they should have not won, but they did. So I think that's a good start. I feel like their Shrewsbury's grade will go up if he can beat those average to a little bit above average teams. I don't expect him to beat the Ohio States and Michigan States, but if he pulls out a win against one of those teams, that would be huge.
Exactly. I mean, playing in the Big Ten, you have the opportunities to beat those teams, and I think that can be a statement for kind of a young head coach. I mean, he's not necessarily young himself, but someone who's just starting off, that maybe your program has what it takes to be one of those teams, and that's kind of important when you're looking at potential recruits trying to come in. If you can show that you're willing to play with those big dogs and that you can be one of them eventually, then that's just a really big step for them, and you have that opportunity playing the Big Ten day in and day out. Play those top teams.
Well, I think that's all we have for this episode of Sports Speak. We'll be back for another episode next week.
If you want more sports content from the Collegian, feel free to go to the Collegian website. And if you like this podcast, please consider subscribing to the Collegian YouTube channel.
Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.